G'day guys and welcome back to our Kart Class Podcast. Today we're going to be looking at the wet versus the dry. So trying to find out ways that we can help your child adapt their driving style. Now we know the biggest thing when it comes to the dry versus the wet is just literally the grip level. In the wet, we're going to be slipping and sliding around. In the dry, hopefully, in a decent day, we're going to have a lot of grip. What can we tell our driver to adjust between a session? So we've had a qualifying session in the dry, everything's going well. Now it's rained before heat 1. The biggest things are we want to adjust our racing line. Now the rubber mixed with water is going to be quite slippery, especially in the braking zone. So we want to try and turn in maybe one kart wider than what we normally would. With a lot of our grippy tyres nowadays for the wet, we don't need to use the extreme outside of the track because these tyres, they're pretty good now. They stick to almost the racing line. So I would be trying to mention, just trying to turn in one kart later. That should be enough to minimize the understeer. When it comes to the braking zones, obviously you want to brake earlier for the wet because we're going to have less traction, but you can also try and brake one kart inside of the traditional racing line that you're used to in the dry, because when you first use the brakes in the wet and you're on the rubber, it's a lot more chance of locking and skidding, which is actually not slowing the kart down, it's skidding at a faster rate. Kids get nervous, they hold the brakes down because they felt they've lost control, and that's when they spin off backwards into the gravel. So you can try and go into the braking zones one kart width narrower, and that's actually going to help the tyres bite into the circuit a lot more in that braking zone. Now, what we might see is, especially from our senior or our more experienced drivers, is the driver actually transferring their weight when they're actually going around the corners in the wet. So what they're going to do is if they're turning a left-hand corner, left-hand hairpin, they're going to be turning the steering wheel left and they're going to be shifting their body towards the right-hand front tyre. And what that's trying to do is it's trying to help that initial steering input, and it's trying to release and lift that inside left tyre. If that wheel lifts quicker and for longer, that's going to help the kart rotation a lot better. So just try and think one kart width wider, a lot less pressure in the braking zone because it's more slippery, and try and brake one kart inside, but also trying to shift your body weight towards the outer front tyre to help that rear inside wheel lift and help rotation. Some other things to be a little bit wary of is the painted lines or the painted curbing. That's going to have a lot less traction when there's water mixed in. So, throttle modulation, if you just smash the throttle down, it's going to have wheel spin. If you're getting that wheel spin, just start to release the acceleration a little bit and then reapply it once it's stopped wheel spinning, because it might feel fast, but it's not really actually taking you any faster. So just try and think about throttle modulation compared to the dry. At the middle of the apex, you can just jam on the accelerator and you'll launch out of the corners. For the wet, we need traction to be going fast out of those corners. So throttle modulation, trying to set off the painted curbing or the wet lines, that will actually help limit the amount of wheel spin. Now, the other thing is when you're overtaking. So in the dry, it's still a little bit slippery when you're passing on the inside of the track, but obviously in the wet, we're going to have less grip as well. So you really need to be making sure that you're alongside the other competitor. It's harder to come back from, say, a kart length because you're trying to outbrake someone on a slippery part of the track with, a slippery surface. That's where we see a lot of kids get unstuck. If you notice that your driver is going into the gravel backwards, that tends to be from just literally locking the brakes. So once the brakes have been locked and they just hold the brakes on, they're going to spin around and go backwards into the gravel. If they start to lock, try your best to release that brake pressure. And even though you're still going to be carrying a lot of speed, as the wheels are starting to, rather than be locked on and skidding, they're going to start to rotate, and that should straighten up the front of the kart and then start to use your front tyres to actually slow the kart down. And hopefully you might run wide, or you might even go to the gravel trap forward. That's going to give you more chance of actually getting around the corner, rather than once you've lost the rear and you're facing 180 degrees backwards, it won't just spin itself back 180 degrees to go forwards and to keep yourself on the track or in the race. So brake as soon as they lock. If it's locking for too long, release and just try and use your front tyres as a full lock motion to try and get around those corners. That's probably the biggest sort of key factors when it comes from driving in the wet to driving in the dry. Is, like I said, throttle modulation, brake modulation. You can't use those pedals as hard as what you were. Braking, one kart width narrower in the braking zones, just to get that initial bite of the tyre rather than actually skidding forward. One kart width wider on entry to a turn-in, and just limit the amount of... It's not as aggressive with the pedals. The steering input can be more aggressive because you've got less actual overall grip, but the pedals, that's where the drive out of the corners is going to be in your foot, in your right foot. That throttle is how much traction you've actually got. Stay off the painted wet lines where possible. And other than that, just do laps in the wet. Like, I just remember myself being in the cadet class, and whenever it rained, there'd be hardly any parents out there. My dad was sort of with an umbrella or even just nothing, and just pushing me to just find the limits. Go on slicks when you can when there's no one there. Make it hard. Practice days should be hard, and you should be trying to find the limit of how sideways the car can go before you lose control. How well you can use the brakes before they lock up, or when they do lock, releasing the brakes so you can get control back. Super important. It's going to help your dry driving out as well, because you're going to have more confidence with the kart control when it gets easier, basically. So hopefully those couple of tips on how to adjust your kid's driving style from the dry to the wet. If you've enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share it around to some of your friends who could be getting frustrated with themselves or their kids when it goes wet or when it goes dry. Those mixed conditions are quite hard on a race day between setup adjustments and driving adjustments. Just trying to get the driver doing their part of it. And then in another podcast episode, we can look at some of the setup adjustments that you would make from the wet to the dry. So until next time, guys, thanks very much. And like I said, if you're enjoying this podcast, click subscribe, do what you can to promote it on Apple Podcasts and things like that, so more people in the karting community can hear our insights. Cheers.